Well, Canadians who want to travel are facing some big headaches, lineups and delays at the country's biggest airports. And before you can even get to the airport, more lines to get a passport. Here is a look at downtown Toronto today with people lined up. You can see them there down the block. Now, for months, Canadians have had issues getting new passports and with their passport renewals. And that is leading to a lot of frustration. Karina Gould is the Minister of Families, Children and Social. She is in Burlington, and in the interest of transparency, my husband was previously employed by Minister Gould, but has been a nonpartisan member of the civil service for several years. Minister, I was looking at the government website before we spoke. In Edmonton, the wait today for walk-in, nearly 7 hours, almost 7 hours in Ottawa, almost 7 hours in Chicoutimi, 6 hours in Gatineau, 6 hours in Kelowna. Is it fair to be asking Canadians to wait that long?
Well, look, Catherine, I think the situation with passports right now is totally unacceptable. We have to do better in terms of serving Canadians. As you know, we've received an unprecedented number of applications over the last couple of months. But that being said, that's why we are implementing a new strategy in metro areas to really ensure that people don't have to have these, completely unacceptable wait times.
Completely unacceptable. So if you could speak to some of these people who have been camping out, you're saying this really isn't fair, what the government is asking of them, because it's unacceptable, but ultimately you're responsible for it.
Well, yeah, it is unacceptable. I mean, no one should have to be camping out overnight to get a passport. Although what we have been seeing, particularly over the last 10 days, is real improvements when it comes to those lineups. So we do have big lineups at the beginning of the day, but at 7 a.m. we have teams of managers at every single busy Service Canada Centre across the country that are triaging. They're handing out tickets so people can come back later in the day. If it's not an urgent request, they can come back at another time. They're giving them appointments to come back either at that passport office or at another Service Canada Centre, and really triaging the line and making sure people have the information that they need, because we don't want people to be having to do these really, really long lineups to get a passport.
You're saying there has been an improvement because you're allowing people to step away and come back. But if I'm understanding the fundamental message, I know you're doing triage and whatnot, the wait is still there. It's just that folks don't actually have to stand in line for all of that time. Is that the takeaway?
That's correct. And I mean, part of the challenge is the numbers, right? I mean, in Edmonton on Thursday, there were almost 700 people in line. That's a lot of people to serve at one Service Canada Centre. All of those 700 people were served either that day if they had urgent travel, or they were given appointments over the weekend if it was leading up to the week, or another appointment at a later date if their travel wasn't urgent. So everyone is being seen, everyone is being talked to, and they're being triaged based on the urgency of their travel. But we certainly don't want to see this. But when you're dealing with those kind of volumes, we only have capacity to serve so many people at one time, but we want to make sure that everyone is getting their passport in time for travel.
I do want to dig down actually a bit further into those numbers and also look at some of the reporting that's been done by my colleagues. I take your example about Edmonton, but if I understand correctly from reporting I've seen in The Sun, from La Presse, when it comes to the number of travel documents that the government is handing out in a year, the number was greater, from what I understand, from 2013 to 2018 in terms of what ESDC is projecting right now. You don't have fewer staff. In fact, you're bringing, as I understand it, more people online just this week. So fundamentally, is it not correct that these lineups are happening despite the fact that there is less demand?
Well, what's different is the nature of the demand. So before the pandemic, we would do over 80% of passport services in person and about 20% by mail. Throughout the pandemic and into these months, we've seen that about 80% of the demand is coming through the mail channel, which is about 40% less efficient than in person. And so the real challenge is coping with the volume in the mail channel. When you look at the numbers for in-person service, I mean, we're still getting people their passports when they're going in person within 10 business days. I mean, most of this is actually less than that because it's almost all urgent travel. The real challenge that we have is the mail channel. And that's where we're throwing a lot of resources right now, is to tackle the backlog that we have in the mail channel, because we got a huge volume in end of February, March, April, May, we're still seeing more volume come in through the mail channel than in the in-person service. And so we really need to tackle that backlog at the mail so that we can make sure that people are getting their passports in a timely way.
Minister, I think you know that this has turned into a criticism, certainly of what's happening with passports, but it's become part of a broader criticism, I think, of the government, that passports are a basic service. People being able to get around the country through airports, that is a basic thing that they expect the government to handle its part of. What would you say to people who are asking themselves, what is going on with this government, that some of the basic issues are not being handled in a way that is, to your own words, acceptable?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, like what's happening with passports is unacceptable. It is a bit of a reflection of ramping up post-pandemic, and that's something that is going on, and a change in how the service is being delivered. It is much more efficient in person than it is through the mail. People can keep their documents as opposed to sending them away. Everything is verified on the spot as opposed to having to make calls to do, a broader reference for the integrity of the document. But I think what is important for Canadians to know is that, this government is doing everything possible to tackle this issue. And
did you drop the ball, though, Minister? Respectfully, given the fact that we're in this situation, did you or did someone else in government drop the ball if we're finding ourselves here?
Well, I'll be honest, we didn't anticipate the volume that came when it did come. We knew that there was going to be a volume, and that's why we started hiring people back in October and January to meet that surge, but it clearly wasn't sufficient. And so that's why, since April, we've also been hiring additional folks. And as of last week, we already had new passport officers that have been trained over the last 3 months, but clearly it wasn't sufficient to meet the demand at the time that it came on. And that's why I can tell you that I and the government are doing everything we can to tackle this challenge and to ensure that Canadians can get their passport in a timely way, because it is a service that Canadians are entitled to. And, my commitment is to continue to push and ensure that we're serving Canadians as best as we can and to really tackle this problem and get it to ground.
Do you have a timeline for that? I know you're pointing to individual instances where you've sort of put out particular fires, but what can you say to Canadians about when this situation will broadly, when you won't have to come on TV and say this is unacceptable? How long is that going to take?
Well, I can tell you that I want it to be sooner rather than later, and absolutely pushing the department and Service Canada to get this done as quickly as possible, working with IRCC to make really important policy changes that are going to help us speed up the process. We've already implemented a number of those. So we're going to continue to see improvements in the coming weeks. We had a big surge in the last couple of weeks because of the Saint Jean holiday in Quebec and Canada Day, but we continue to see improvements in the number of passports that are issued every week. They continue to increase, and we're continuing to ramp that up. We do have a backlog that we are tackling at the same time, so that's hiring additional folks to get through that backlog and making sure that our productivity continues to increase so that we can issue more and more passports every single week, which is what we're seeing. So I don't have an exact timeline, but what we're working towards is really getting to a much better position as the summer goes on so that we don't have these unnecessary long lines for folks who, just want to travel. And I understand how frustrated they are. And I'm frustrated too. And that's why I'm working, around the clock with officials to improve the situation.
Speaking of folks, last question, who aren't just frustrated, but who are actually out money. I know I read about one woman who had a trip planned to Thailand, $5,000. She applied months in advance for her passport, did not get it in time. Will the government offer any compensation to anyone in a situation like that, where they have lost money because they couldn't receive their passport in time?
So it unfortunately is pretty clear on the website that we will not be reimbursing people for missed travel because of a passport. That is a policy decision that IRCC has in place. We do recommend people to have a passport in hand before they book travel, but they should not be and will not be charged for expedited processing if it's beyond the service standards of 20 business days. And so I do, encourage people to, plan well in advance. And I know that so many people did that. And that's exactly why we're going to continue to tackle this backlog, because we don't want people to be missing their travel, especially those who, planned or, have a family emergency. We need to make sure that we're serving them, because we don't want this to be the case.
Okay. Thank you for your time today, Minister.
Thank you, Catherine.
Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video.